So let's talk a little bit about the webinar etiquette. So in order to have a smooth and productive webinar experience for all participants, please make sure that you follow you follow these guidelines. Please keep your microphone muted throughout the webinar. This will help maintain an organized and distraction-free environment. If you have any questions, please use the chat box to submit them, and I will make sure that I address them all as much as I can. So this webinar, as usual, will be recorded for future reference and for those who cannot attend today's session. And the recorded webinar, along with a handout that I will share with you, plus extra resources, will be distributed in the PD2Go newsletter next week. So welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm excited to have everyone here, and let's start the conversation about what you find the most challenging when it comes to writing replies, because I know it's challenging. I teach at the College of Education. I used to. I haven't taught for a year, and I miss that actually. And I know that one of the most challenging parts is, okay, what is it that I need to do on Gap to keep the conversation alive and going? So I see three responses here, writing the same feedback over and over again. Oh, I get that. Yes, I've been there. Expecting students to engage and they just don't because they feel the assignment is done. Okay. Many of the cues are just not very conducive to dialogue. I agree with that. Okay. Anything else? Let me see what's on the chat box. Students include uh, extraneous information and do not fully answer the question based on credible research. Possibly they do not understand what the Q is about. That's a possibility. The use of AI, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So we are going to be talking today about what is it? I'm going to give you a few tips on how to address discussion questions on gaps. Super simple. And we only have 30 minutes. For the rest, I just want to hear what is it that you're doing on gap, share best practices, making sure that we use these 30 minutes on getting as many tips as we can to fully engage students on the discussion questions. Let me check the chat. Professor DeVita says, keeping my responses interesting enough to entice my students to respond and maintain the conversation online. Absolutely. Oh, I had a little bit more. Sorry about that. Let me just, I would love to read all of them. Posing specific enough question to engage. What I find most challenging is the application of students' applied knowledge in real-world scenarios. I increasingly observe a diminishing level of practical discussion. I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Keeping my responses interesting enough to entice my students to respond and maintain the conversation. Absolutely. We have all been there. We have all been trying to engage students on Gap, because no matter where we teach, if we teach online, in person, there is a component on Gap right there that we need to make sure that we engage students in. And as I said before, no matter how or where your course is delivered, no matter the modality, you will always have content to facilitate and learning to facilitate on Gap on a weekly basis. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about essential writing effective replies on the weekly discussion questions. What is it that we can do? What are some tips that we can use? And I'm going to rely on your expertise as well to see what is it that is working in your classroom that you can share with the rest of the faculty in terms of these weekly discussion questions that we have talked a lot about them, and still it remains to be a challenge in most courses. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the effective reply strategy, and it's basically 9 tips in which we can create and craft meaningful replies at Westcliff University. So what is the effective reply strategy? Let me just go back. I'm sorry about that. There you go. It's basically a strategy or a technique in which we aim at helping instructors to engage students on the discussion questions on GAP. So basically, it emphasizes exploration, critical thinking, critical reflection, how to, as some of you said, how to apply in real world scenarios, self reflection, peer interaction, research, personal connection. So basically, everything that we know works for engaging students in asynchronous settings. So the principles of effective reply, and I'm going to go through this very quickly because everything that I'm showing you right now are just bits from different courses that we have on Acorn that I will share with you at the end. So if you're interested in going a little bit deeper because 30 minutes is not enough, then go ahead and explore Acorn for this purpose. So when we talk about the principles of an effective reply, and when we talk about effective, it means it engages students, keeps the conversation going, not only on Wednesday at 11:58 p.m., 1 minute before the deadline of the DQs, but just keeps the conversation going throughout the week. We make sure that when we reply to students' posts on Gab, they know that we're there, that we know that we're active on Gab. We are following their learning there. It's also a moment of personalization when you reply to your student. It's kind of a one-on-one conversation online. And of course, one of the main principles is not asking questions that do not keep the conversation going. So asking open-ended questions that ask for reflection and elaborate on the ideas that they already gave on their posts. So let's talk a little bit about effective replies. And I'm going to have to move, sorry about that. I'm going to have to go ahead and move the bar because it's really interrupting my slides. Okay, when we talk about effective replies on Gap, we talk about replies that explore further interactions, that facilitate critical thinking, that it helps students frame whatever they're learning in real world context. It's a reply that you give to students that actually encourage them to self-reflect, to connect with other classmates, to keep on having conversations based on research and further exploration. So it also invites students to take whatever they're learning that week and actually make personal connections. You actually help students visualize the content through different scenarios and, of course, empower creative thinking to make sure that your students are actually learning, that you are giving them an opportunity to critically think about what they're learning that week. Um, Joni, if you're there and you can you help me with the chat because I see 19 messages?
No problem. Yes, I'm here. I'm just off
Okay, thank
camera
you
today.
so
Hi,
much.
everybody.
Okay, thank you, Joni. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you a few examples on how we can actually craft effective replies on Gap. And again, please feel free to use your chat box to tell me what has worked for you and what in the different aspects that I will be showing later on. What is it that you feel like this is something important that we need to add, or maybe this is a difficult, challenging thing that is we don't have the time to do so. So this is an open conversation when there are no right or wrong answers. So let's start with explore further. So basically here, instructors encourage students to pursue deeper understanding and continuous inquiry. So basically, you have prompts like, okay, really good job. Can you explore this topic a little bit more? Let me just, I had annotations. Can you explore this topic a little bit more? Or, oh, I really like your idea, but can you extend this idea into a different field? Or you have touched an interesting point here, but can you actually think a little bit more about this, investigate further, or maybe think about how this concept relates to or works in another culture? Or you ask students to provide more examples or research to support their view. As one of you said on the chat, sometimes students just reply to the question, the discussion questions, but you see that there's no foundation, research foundation. They didn't they didn't read the weekly reading. So it's important to also help them explore further with a post, with a reply that you're giving to their posts. Again, if you have any questions, please use the chat box or raise your hand, and we will be happy to hear from you. So I have a question for you before moving on. How do you help your students explore further when it comes to discussion questions? Again, forget about the live sessions. Think about those weekly discussion questions or tasks that we have on Gap. What do you do? What has worked for you to help them explore further? Let me see the chat. Anyone? Well, we can move on, and then keep bringing your ideas on the chat box.
Eve, I don't know if you can see it in your screen, but Professor DeVito has his hand up.
Okay, okay. Go ahead, Tony.
I like that Dr. Evie's looking up in the air. I just love that. So yeah, one thing I like to do is if I examine the student's response pretty thoroughly, and then I try to bring it, circle back into what my business is all about, with DeVito's Hairstyling Services. And especially from a strategic perspective, I'll say, hey, you mentioned this in your response, and this is what I do in my business. What do you think of that? Do you think I'm on the right track? What would you do differently? And just to see what, I like to bring it back to my own experiences, just like Professor Crow mentioned in the chat. There's nothing more powerful than anecdotal experience in the business world, especially from my perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I do that too, so that students avoid AI. Absolutely. That's a great tip. Thank you so much for sharing. So when we talk also about engaging students on gap discussion questions, we need to make sure that we facilitate critical reflection, that we actually guide students in examining their assumptions and understanding different perspectives. So things like, can you think about the assumptions that you gave me, if they're whole truth in all cases, or okay, you're giving me one side of the issue. Can you think about a different perspective? Or whatever topic you're discussing, okay, can you explain potential strengths and weaknesses of your argument? Or can you think about this from another lens? Those very short writing prompts that you can actually give your students can actually spark the conversation on Gap. So we need to make sure that whatever discussion questions we have, and some of them are not really discussion questions, they're tasks, they're weekly assignments, but they need to be done on Gap, and they need to foster interaction, right? So one tip that I will give you is always try to frame whatever content you're teaching in real world context. So making sure that learning is connected to practical real world situations, enhancing its relevance and applicability. If students feel like, okay, whatever I'm learning, I can apply in real world, they will be more engaged in those conversations. So maybe if you're talking about a theory or a concept, so you can actually ask students, as Tony said, okay, does it apply to my job or my business, or what do you think? So giving specific real world context really works, or maybe current events or everyday life or specific world scenarios that can actually help students connect what they're learning into their real world situations. We also need to make sure that students are prompted to consider their learning process and personal growth. I really believe in that. I really believe that if students reflect on their learning process, they learn better, learning sticks, so they remember whatever they're learning at that week, and they actually can make those connections are so important when it comes to education. So these are just ideas. I'm not saying that this is exactly what you have to write, just ideas on how you can encourage self-reflection. So the questions like How has your perspective of this topic evolved since beginning of the course, so they can actually compare what they knew, what they didn't know, how it evolved? What was the most challenging part of the learning, and how did you overcome it? In what ways did you feel your understanding has deepened after engaging with this topic? Or can you reflect on your learning journey? What personal insights have you gained from this discussion? Or how this, whatever you're learning in this course align with your personal values? So that those type of situations, those type of replies will help students feel connected, feel self-reflect on their learning process, and of course, keep the conversation going on that. Any other prompt that you use for encourage self-reflection? I script here, have them reflect on their work in relation to the concept or questions. Offer sufficient feedback when grading and do not automatically give full credit. Absolutely. One of the main issues, I don't know about you, I'm talking about my experience. When I was teaching, we are really blessed at the College of Education. We have amazing students because they also want to be teachers. So they're really good and they're really engaging. And they're really engaged in conversations. But sometimes it's very difficult to get them to talk to one another. So they reply to the teachers or the instructors post, but even if it's in the rubric, like they need to reply to a peer, it seems to be not too, they don't really go too deep into the conversations. So I can actually, as facilitators of the online discussions on GAP, we can actually use this type of prompts to make sure that we foster a collaborative learning environment where all the students learn from one another. So things like, oh, have you noticed yes, what Emma brought up ideas, or what she brought up is a similar idea to yours. How does your perspective complement or differ from theirs? Or things like, how would you build on this idea your classmates have shared? Or which of your classmates' posts resonated most with you? Or have you noticed any common themes among your peers' responses? So they feel the need to go and read the peers' responses and learn from one another. Now, my question to you is, because for me, that was one of the most challenging aspects of the discussion questions. How do you make sure that students are not only learning from you, but they're also learning from their classmates on GAP? How have you done so far? That has proven to be really successful.
I sometimes, good morning, everyone. I tell students that they don't always need to agree with their peers when they respond to the peer responses. So I want to encourage them to present a different perspective, but I emphasize that it has to be done respectfully. So they need to provide or offer their views in a constructive way. But when they think and present a different perspective, I think we will be encouraging them to reflect critically, and like later, and we will be preparing them for life. Because in life we don't always have to agree on everything, but of course when we disagree we have to support our view with resources. So even if they disagree, they have to support their disagreements with scholarly research.
You so much. Yes, it's a wonderful tip. Thank you so much for sharing. Professor DeVito, you raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, something I like to do too is, and I just forgot about this until I heard everybody saying this. Sometimes I'll say, okay, class, let's go big picture. So, student Johnny said this about this particular theory. I challenge anyone in this class to find what he's missing. There's something he's missing that I read in the course ebook. Can anybody find it? Whoever gets there first gets the gold star or something silly like that, right? Just so we can, entice the students to get involved in the conversation. I like saying, let's go big picture.
I love those ideas. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing. So we only have 8 minutes. So I'm going to go really fast because I want to hear from you. as well. So we also need to make sure that we encourage independent investigation, broadening students' knowledge and perspectives. Basically, we need to trigger research and exploration every week. So things like, oh, this is a great start, but how could you further explore this topic? Maybe go into your recent studies or the weekly readings. Or can you find more evidence to support your point? Or, okay, this is a wonderful post, but can you consider exploring outside of the course materials? Or can you maybe think or look outside our discipline and see what other approaches to this topic? So I think it's very important to make sure that whatever students are doing in GAP is based on research, it's based on their thoughts, absolutely, but also on further exploration and research. And we do provide in every syllabus, in every course, we do provide enough materials for them to engage every week and be sure that they use that for the discussion questions. Let's make sure that we invite students to connect what they're learning to their personal world. So students, make sure that you encourage students to relate course materials to their own experience, making learning more engaging. I will be sharing all these tips with you. I created a handout that I will share with you in a minute. So things like, does this topic remind you of a particular situation or challenge you have faced personally? And you can see there that I always add the name. That's my thing. I feel like it's a more personal stuff. You can have, I do have that. I have a document with prompts and ideas, but then I personalize it per student. Things like, okay, good point, Kiara. What personal connections can you make with these materials? How do your life experiences inform your perspective? How do you see this concept playing a role in your future career or personal development? Then we have, and this is something that I know most of you do really, really well, use scenarios or case studies to promote application and problem solving skills. So I'm going to give you a few ideas. Imagine that you are in, I don't know, any specific professional role. How would you apply this concept to solve a real world problem? Oh, okay. So let's say you're tasked with implementing this idea in a team setting. Or let's picture yourself as a leadership in a leadership position. Or think about this but from in a completely different field. Or what if you were school principal or you were advising a company? What practical steps would you suggest based on your understanding? So basically giving students specific scenarios outside of the box, thinking outside of the box, so they can actually transfer, promote application and transfer knowledge. And of course, use their problem solving skills. Make sure that you empower creative thinking, critical and creative thinking. So where your post actually helps students to be creative, to be innovative, and prepare them for complex problem solving and decision making. Ideas, for instance, were some unconventional ways to approach this problem? Or, okay, your solution to this problem is really good. Can you think about something completely different, completely new solution to this issue? Or how could you creatively combine concepts from this course to come up with a new approach or innovation? Or in what ways might you challenge the traditional thinking of these topics? Can you propose an alternative perspective? That question will actually spark conversations on your GAP course. One of the things that I loved when I was teaching at the College of Education was to have my live sessions, very personal opinion, after the discussion questions, because that discussion questions gave me so much data that I could work on for the live sessions. I knew the gaps that the students had, that so I could tackle those gaps on my class. I knew the strengths of my students. I knew their perspective, so it was easier for me to plan classes when the discussion questions had taken place. Okay, so I have a question for you. How do you empower creative thinking in your class on GAP? What is it that you do? use the chat box. While you think about it, I'm going to move on because I only have 3 minutes. I hope I gave you a few tips in less than 30 minutes on how to approach your discussion questions on Gap. And again, this idea came from the hundreds of classroom visits and online teaching support that we provided at the Light Center. And we knew that the professors are struggling with the discussion questions. And so I hope these tips and the resources that I'm going to share with you in a minute help. So what are the first takeaway? The main takeaway, we have three. It's essential to reflect on your role in the weekly discussions and how that actually the weekly discussion questions play a major role in most of the courses at Westcliff University. Remember that the essence of effective online education lies in the ability to create a community of inquiry where students feel valued, engaged, and intellectually challenged or stimulated. And it's your job as instructors to make sure that their participation is proactive, thoughtful, and you facilitate the online discussion in a way that the conversation again is alive throughout the whole week, not only one day a week, and that students are actually learning while discussing with one another. The final takeaway, I hope, is that the key to success in these weekly discussions on GAP is continuous improvement of adaptation. So always ask students for the feedback when it comes to the way you engage them in their discussion questions. It's always a good way to go. They're always very honest. And again, your role is vital. It's of paramount importance on GAP. Now I have another question for you, and I'm going to open my Menti again. In your experience, what type of instructors' replies usually generate the most thoughtful responses from students? First, open-ended questions. 2, real-world applications. 3, critical thinking challenges. 4, scenario-based questions. And 5, reflective prompts. I'm going to add the link again to the chat. Let's see what you think. Sometimes it's difficult. All the tips that I gave you, there are hundreds. I just chose 9. And if you actually craft a reply to your students that has to do with real world application, doesn't mean that you're not actually doing something dealing with critical thinking and problem solving. So you can actually merge all those topics. So let's see, anyone else? Let me see the chat. Think globally. Second, real world application. So I'm working with 3 screens, so that's why you're seeing me. Okay, 4, all of them. Agree. 4, scenario-based questions, reflective prompts. Okay, thank you so much. Now I have another question for you. Oh, before the question for you, I want to. It's only 30 minutes. We're almost up, but there's so much that you can continue learning on Acorn. There are more than 150 courses, hundreds of resources for you. But I wanted today to share with you 4 courses that have to do with what I'm talking about today. How to engage students online, how they can master GAP. By mastering, it has to do with discussion questions, the announcement function, everything dealing on GAP. So I'm going to look for those links to share with you. There are 4 courses. Yeah, the 4 courses have to do with GAP. There's one that is an interactive recorded webinar. I'm going to share that with you right now. And if you want to have access to the tips that I gave you today, I created a job aid that you can access on Acorn. So to have access to this handout, please log in on Acorn and download it from our TV LMS. Any questions? We have a lot on Acorn dealing with gap, and it has been revised and revamped, so it's ready for your use. Now, I don't want to leave without inviting you to our very last initiative of 2024. 2024 has been a very productive year for the Light Center. We want to close this year by talking about practical approaches to critical thinking. Again, how to make sure our students are critically reflecting and thinking in our courses. This will take place on December the 12th at 8 a.m. and 12 noon Pacific time and will be facilitated by College of Education professor Alaina Dayardad. So let me see the chat. Um, if you want to, Shirley, just to answer your question, the job aid is the link that is on top of your message. Click there, and then you will have access to the job aid that you can download from there. And there, I just post all the tips that I share with you today. I don't want to leave on this. I'm gonna go back and give me a sec, please. Oh, okay. So I have another question for you. And let's use a chat box. I use a Menti, but I don't know why I cannot go back. Before saying goodbye and thanking you for attending today's session, I want to do two things. Please make sure that you complete this form and let us know what you think about these professional development opportunities. We want to hear from you, your topics. We are designing, as we speak right now, the 2025 initiatives. But then I want you to also, before leaving, before saying goodbye, just on the chat box, one advice to a new professor. Say we have lots of new professors at Westfield now, but a new professor, an advice on how to approach discussion questions on GAP. What is it? One tip that they can use to make sure that they engage their students on GAP. You can use a chat box. I had a Menti, but I don't know why I cannot use it. Yes, good one. Good one. Acorn has lots of resources that they can do at their own pace and time. That's a good one. Well, thank you, everyone. We are 4 minutes past, so I thank you for attending today's webinar. And I will be sending recording and handouts on all of everything as we normally do on the PD2Go newsletter. So thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.